الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء فقدره تقديرا يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا وبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين ودع أذاهم وتوكل على الله وكفى بالله وكيلا وتوكل على الحي الذي لا يموت وتوكل على العزيز الرحيم الذي يراك حين تقوم وتقلبك في الساجدين إنه هو السميع العليم الصلاة والسلام على الأشرف الأنبياء إمام المرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي عنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك صدق الله العظيم صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
We have gathered here once again today. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making this gathering possible. And it is through this gathering that we invoke Allah to truly guide us all onto the straight path, His path, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the path of those who came before us, who came with the message, the true message of Allah, and not of those on whom His anger or displeasure was evoked. And definitely not of those whom strayed from the Sirat al-Mustaqim. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqtatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. I'm invoking Allah today to make my speech clear and my thoughts clear as well, so I can present to you what I desire to present to you. Inshallah, I come here with a few points and I truly put my trust in Allah to guide me throughout these khutbahs. So inshallah, He guides me in cohesion with the spirit of the Quran, the spirit of the truth. And inshallah, He can clarify my thoughts and my speech so that it can reach the hearts of each and every one of you. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. So last week we got into the concept of water and we compared that to revelation, and how water fertilizes the soil, and similarly the revelation, the Quran, comes down like the rainfall and it mingles with us and starts to guide us and transform us in ways that Allah wants us to be transformed. And then we realize that in order for us to achieve these transformations, we have to follow what's in the Quran, the advices that Allah has given to us to interpret the Quran and to find the meaning in the Quran. And one of those that we went over was tadabbur. And tadabbur, if you guys remember, was to contemplate. Okay, so keeping in that spirit, I want to move on to a parable presented in the Quran in Surah Al-A'raf. As we know, the Quran is filled with parables, whether it be a dead land getting water from the heavens, or different animals that Allah uses to draw certain points out from the Quran. So in this specific example in Surah Al-A'raf, the parable of the dog is mentioned. And so I want to go over this ayah firstly with you, and then inshallah I want to tie it into other portions of the Quran so we can find the spirit of this parable and what Allah is trying to tell us in order to better understand His guidance and the Quran. So in Surah A'raf we have verse number 175. I'm going to read the English portion so you guys can follow along. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Relate to them, O Muhammad, an account of him to whom we gave our signs, but he cast them off. Thereupon Shaitan pursued him, and he became one of the perverse. Had we wished, we would have surely raised him by their means. By the means of the ayah, we would have raised this servant of ours, but he clung to the earth and followed his base desires. So his parable is that of a dog. If you make for it, it lolls out its tongue. And if you let it alone, it also lolls out its tongue. Such is the parable of the people who dispute our signs. So recount these narratives to them so that they may reflect. So once again, Allah is imploring us at the end of this parable to reflect upon what He's drawn as an analogy with the dog. Okay, so in this ayah, one of the themes presented is an indifference to the verses of Allah when they come to you. So such as a dog, Allah is claiming is that if you make for it, its tongue is always sticking out, it's panting. And if you leave it alone as well, its tongue is always sticking out. So Allah is telling us, don't have this characteristic of a dog when it comes to the Quran, the ayahs when they come to you. So, and a concept of indifference right here is pointed out to us. So, when the Quranic verses come to us, we have to really have a sort of respect about it and then contemplate and not become indifferent to them. So there's certain advices, guidance given to us in the Quran, and Allah is saying that do not be like this dog who is very indifferent towards things, doesn't really use his reason. And later on in this surah, it talks about an'am, that let me see if I can find the verse here, but it basically saying that, it's right here. Certainly we have winnowed out for hell many of the jinn and humans. They have hearts with which they do not understand. They have eyes with which they do not see. They have ears with which they do not hear. They are like cattle, rather they are more astray. So once again, this Allah is using the example of an animal to let us know, do not become like this animal, this characteristic of an animal. As we know, a cattle, I don't know if you ever drive in the middle of the night, if you've been through this instance where the cow is crossing the road, it sees the light, but what does it do? It stands still, right? It's frozen. So that's so deep too that Allah is using this analogy of a cattle that even when the good things, the light, like look at that, the light, if you look at it in a metaphysical way, could be the spiritual guidance. When it comes to you, don't just freeze. Don't become like that dog that the tongue is out when good things come to it or when nothing comes to it. So responsiveness to the light is something that Allah is imploring here. Respond to it, see it and get guided by it. So what I want to do right now is connect this now to the verses that I recited at the beginning of the khutbah from Surah Inshirah. Surah Inshirah is, it goes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alam nashrah laka sadrak. The first verse. Didn't we, O Muhammad, open your chest? So if you look at sudur and qulubihim, these are mentioned throughout the Quran, the hearts and the chest. And they're very symbolic of internal vision. Right? So even in this verse that I went over, it says they have hearts with which they do not understand. So there is an aspect of knowledge of the unseen within each and every one of our hearts. And so in this verse, Allah is stating to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala. Didn't we open up your chest? Alam nashrah laka sadrak. So if you want to take this to another ayah, in Surah Zumar, I'll go Surah An'am first, in verse number 125. It says, so whoever Allah wants to guide, He expands his breast. So once again, this aspect of nashrah laka sadrak. Whoever Allah wants to guide, He expands his breast to contain Islam. And whoever He wants to send astray, He makes his breast tight and constricted as though he were climbing into the sky. Thus does Allah place defilement upon those who do not believe. So this aspect of sudur, like if you want to think of, people get very claustrophobic sometimes in elevators when the space tightens around them, right? So Allah is drawing this comparison right now that, if you're not engaged with my signs of the Quran, if you're not engaged with the verses of the Quran, what happens to your chest is that it restricts, and not in the physical sense, but more so in the spiritual sense. Like you feel, emotionally, you feel restricted. Whereas what He wants to do is open up your chest to Islam. So when He tells Rasulullah, Alam nashrah laka sadrak, it's like, wow, that is a huge title that He's given to Rasulullah, a huge blessing that He's given to Rasulullah, right? That He's opened up his chest now to this knowledge, to this guidance. And even in Christianity, the concept of baptism, it's on the physical body, right? When they immerse themselves in water, but more so what they're trying to do is get the water inside the chest. That is the metaphor behind it. So the chest, sudur and qulubihim, the hearts and the chest are very pivotal in the Quran. And they're mentioned in a sense of expanding it to get Islam in there, submission to Allah, and through that submission, we can get the guidance in our sudur. Okay, so Alam nashrah laka sadrak, wa wada'na anka wizrak. Okay, wizrak, it says, and did we not remove from you this burden, this himla, this wizr. Himla and wizr are sort of like weights on you, you know, and not the physical. Like, let's say if someone put 100 pounds on your shoulders right now, right? How would you feel? You know, fatigued, worn out, very taxed. But this is a sort of like a spiritual burden. And you know, in Surah Al-Baqarah, the first verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, those who believe in the unseen. So a pivotal, condition for us Muslims to believe in the Deen is that we believe that there are forces in the unseen that are not visible to the eye, that are affecting us every day. So an illness, you know, a day when you wake up that you're just feeling so low and heavy, these are not just one-shot things. There's a spiritual significance behind it. So the wizra that Allah is speaking of in the second verse of Surah Inshirah is a weight, a spiritual weight that comes on. And usually in the Quran, when we are visited with the term wizra and himla, it has to do with transgressions and sin. Like it says, on the day of Qiyamah, they will carry that himla on their backs, which means the burden of sin. So Allah is saying in this surah that haven't I opened up your chest and haven't I removed that burden from you? And what usually happens, let's say if you 10 years you're with these 100 pounds on your shoulders and one day someone just comes and takes it off. Like what type of feeling would you have, right? Oh my God, like an elated feeling, like you can just jump into the sky, right? So this is exactly what the signs of Allah and the guidance of Allah seeks to do to us. Is number one, we want to expand our chest, and number two, it takes the burden off our shoulders, that spiritual burden. وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ الَّذِي أَنْقَذَ ظَهْرَكَ, that burden that was weighing so heavy on you. It's saying to Rasulullah, you know, there's a burden weighing so heavy on you, I removed that from you. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. So what did we just mention? When you take off that weight, you said that you can feel like what? You can fly. So Allah right there said, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. And we raised your repute, it could mean, or it means that we raised your remembrance of Allah. So sometimes what happens when we have spiritual transgressions, the sins that we commit, it stops the dhikr of Allah from reaching to Him. You know, because there's angels who take there are angels all over the place for different commands. And one of the duties of the angels is to take that dhikr, that remembrance, that worship, that invocation to Allah and raise it up to Him. So when we clean ourselves of that burden, what happens is that it's much easier to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it gets raised to Him. So there, you know, it's the verses of the Quran, when you kind of connect the dots, they're very beautiful. And so how do we tie that back to the dog parable right now that I mentioned at the beginning, right? The dog parable is that when the verses come to them, they're indifferent. But this is the light that's coming to us. This is a treasure from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the verses from heaven, the spirit of truth. The Ruhul Amin has brought it down to us. Nazala bihir Ruhul Amin. You know, Allah sent it down, but through the spirit of truth. So we want to be surrounded by that spirit of truth each and every day. And we want that nur to be beside us each and every day. And we want to show appreciation to Allah that, hey, you know what? Like, I appreciate what you've given to me. I'm doing shukr to you. I'm very grateful to you. So we don't want to be like that dog, that whether it comes, our tongue is sticking out, or whether it doesn't come, our tongue is sticking out. When it comes, we want to make sure that we're not indifferent, that we're capturing the true essence of the Quran and capturing its guidance, inshallah. And I pray that you know, each and every one of us can make our way back to these verses that will give life to a dead land and that will relieve that burden from us, open up our chest, and inshallah we can be appreciative and grateful of Allah's blessing. We implore Allah to make us ones who believe in Allah and who do righteous deeds, and ones who enjoin, you know, the truth amongst each other, and ones who enjoin patience as well in these times of difficulty. Ameen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. I want to do a quick tafsir of Surah 95 in the Quran, in the second portion. It's called Surah Deen. Deen is the fig, and it says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Wat-tini waz-zaytun, wa-turi sinin, wa hadha al-balad al-amin, laqad khalaqna al-insana fi ahsani taqwim, thumma radadnahu asfala safilin, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati falahum ajrun ghayru mamnun, فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So this is very interesting, and I kind of did my own research on this. The first 3 verses of the surah, Allah is taking an oath, right? وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. There's a common thread in these 3 oaths, okay? So the first one, وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونَ, is the fig and the olive. Okay, so if you look back on the olive in the Quran is mentioned 7 times, one of which is this surah. But there's mention even in the verse of light, in Surah Nur, where it describes Allah, Nurun ala Nur. It says that there's the oil, right, of the olive tree. That's one of the mentions in this surah, in this surah 7 times. In the Bible, however, it is mentioned 160 times. So, I'm not going to go over what the Bible mentions. Briefly, the olive tree, before Jesus, Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, gave his prophecy of the end times, in it's Matthew 24, for anyone who's interested in further reading on this. He was on the Mount of the Olive Tree. So it's a very blessed tree that Allah has created. And we know olive oil, the benefits that it has for us, right? It's a fat, but in a way that it actually benefits us and doesn't cause cholesterol or heart disease or high blood pressure. So the olive is mentioned 160 times in the Bible, and the fig tree is an analogy of the kingdom of heaven in the Bible. Also in Matthew 24. Is the fig and the olive is mentioned. So Allah is taking oath by this, but He doesn't really describe it. He's kind of encouraging us to go to the previous scriptures, while maintaining Quran as our muhaymin. In Surah Ma'idah it says that we sent the Torah to the Bani Israel. Then we sent Nabi Isa with the Evan angel, which is the Injil. And then we sent this blessed book, which is a muhaymin over these scriptures, which means a muhaymin means a guardian, a sort of a validator. Like when you go to something that's subjective, the Quran is here, I'll read it, but if something contradicts the Quran, I'm going to reject it, and if something's with the Quran, I will accept it. So Allah is imploring us to find out now what is it that He's swearing by? وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونَ. Why was He swearing by the fig and the olive? And so to take it back to the previous scriptures, they're very blessed and frequently mentioned things that are firstly beneficial to us in this life, and that represent the kingdom of heaven in the akhirah. Okay, وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونَ, and more so centered around Nabi Isa alayhi salam. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ. What is Turi Sinin? Mount Sinai. What happened at Mount Sinai? Anybody know? So when Nabi Musa alayhi salam got called to the fire, it was at the right side of the mount. It keeps on saying in the Quran, وَطُورِ, I forgot what it is, but the right side of Mount Sinai. And even when he went to get the 10 commandments from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was at the Mount Sinai. So it's a very blessed place. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ. So again, this is taking us back to Judaism, right? The Torah and how it came down is a blessed place. And then lastly, وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. What is هَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ? The first place that was created for worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. They raised the what? The Kaaba. So وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. So Allah is taking an oath by these 3 great religions that we know now, but also the last oath is to the Balad al-Amin, the place, the first place of worship, and the secure town. The secure town is Balad al-Amin, the Baytul Amin, right? Where the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So he's swearing by these things, and then he says, we have created the man in the best of forms. Ahsan means excellent. Like, when you're created, like look at your joints, look at the way that your body is moving, your intellect, your hearing, you're feeling stuff. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, in the best manner. And another point in the Quran, it says, don't change the creation of Allah. And what are we seeing nowadays is that everything has to be experimented on. Everything has to be changed from its natural state. But Allah is saying, I've already created you. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So don't change it, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we will take you to the lowest of the low. And in the Quran, this asfala means the lowest of the low is referred to hellfire, the lowest of the low, asfala. So we will reduce you to the hellfire, or it can mean we will reduce you to decrepit old age. Okay, so we've created you in the best form, strong, you're thinking, but then we can take you to the old age, where it says in Surah Yasin that whoever we take in the eldest age, what do? We reverse them in creation. And it can also mean to the hellfire. And then it says illa, the condition, right? This is very important. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati. Except for the ones who believe and do righteous deeds. And they're very connected, right? When you get the guidance of the light, it should transform your heart to change the way that you're acting. So your deeds get changed as well. Like, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. For them is a reward without interruption. خالدون, like in infinite reward. And this again infers that the dunya is what? The opposite. It's very finite. You know, everything around us, we see kids, they're children, then they raise into maturity and then they turn old. Everything is working in a pattern where it's not forever. Everything in this earth has to go. There's nothing forever. But Allah is saying that if you do righteous deeds and you believe, you know, you will have a reward that is uninterrupted. It is forever. So this is something to think about. You know, the signs are here to us that nothing in this world is permanent. Even the feelings that we had, you know, they're fading. So in the parable of the dog, what did it mention? He denied the signs of his Lord. Thereupon shaitan pursued him and made him follow his what? Desires, which are again deceptive. They're fading. They're not permanent. They're not with truth. They're false. False desires. So we have to distinguish now that, you know, there's something as permanence, the true haqq, and there's other stuff that is an illusion, a deception. And to be able to discern between those two things. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. So why are you denying after the true way of life has come to you? This is the truth. So do not deny it now. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. So it could mean that Allah is the best of judges, but also in another portion of the Quran, when it mentions a hukm, it could be a legislation or a law. Right? كَذَلِكَ نَزَّلْنَاهُ حُكْمًا عَرَبِيًّا. And thus we have sent down to you an Arabic legislation, a law from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why are you denying this way, this law, this permanent haqq, truthful way of life that we've given you, when Allah is the best of legislators? He knows the law that you need. You know, He knows the natural way that He's created you, and He's given you a law according to that. أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Inshallah, Allah can guide us all, forgive our sins, and turn us back towards His light, towards His words, and, you know, to the spirit of the truth. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. آمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. صلوات الله.